this, as the title says, you know, says me comparing Fire Pro, SmackDown vs. Raw, and the new Impact game. And I have played it. I don't own it, but I have played it. I played about an hour 15 minutes today with a friend of mine. And I will say this: the controls are, as far as the basic controls, mechanics are very good. They're excellent. The game is fun to play. I don't know how much fun it would be played after like a week, but it's definitely fun to play at first. Reversals are real fun. Heard a lot of people talk about that already, which is good. But there's lots of good stuff in the game as far as the control aspect of it. Graphically, the game looks amazing. It definitely is the best looking wrestling game I have ever seen. And that's pretty much the best I can talk about the game, because if you know anything about the game, a lot of things were definitely cemented. I played like 3 characters. I played as AJ, Samoa Joe, and I think Christian. No, AJ, Samoa Joe, and I can't remember the third person I used. But I used them, and while they definitely had most of their signature moves, they didn't have all of their signature moves. The game reportedly has about 125 to 150 moves, and with 25 guys in the game, you know, each with 8 moves apiece, you know, you're definitely going to have a lot of guys have the same types of moves over and over and over again, and you definitely get that feel. Everyone, you know, the few games I played, everyone kind of played the same. There wasn't a lot of difference there. It's definitely not a wrestling simulator. It's definitely more of an arcade game, and that you can wear guys down, and they're not going to show kind of any ill effects to you beating on them. I'm not really big on that. I like more of a simulation game. I like to simulate matches a little bit more myself. Some people who don't necessarily like that, this is definitely a game they're going to enjoy a lot more. I did play an Ultimate X game. That was fun. I don't know how much fun it would be, you know, like I said, after about a week of playing. I played part of the story modes. It seemed pretty good for a story mode, and from what I have read and seen and all of that sort of thing, it sounds like it's definitely better than what we usually get in a story mode, but I don't think that's necessarily saying a lot, so take that for what it is. Online play seems like it's pretty good stuff, so you know, that's good, particularly if you want to play online. Of course, you can't play your creator wrestlers online. That's a big no-no apparently, and the creator wrestler option is very limited. I don't think it's very good. I think it's one of the biggest lacking things in the game, and I think that over anything else, to me, I think that's going to steer a lot of people away, and I think Midway really underestimated that part of it. Though there are rumors that they brought this game out early with the hopes that it would make enough money so Midway would be around so that they could make a second game, and the second game would be better. I've heard that from a lot of people. I hope that's not the case. I hope they just didn't, you know, bring out a $60 demo, but, you know, Sony basically did that with the last Gran Turismo game, so, you know, what you gonna do? But, you know, I would definitely say it was a good first start. There's definitely enough good stuff to build upon. It's not like they need to totally rake the game away. They just need to add a lot more to the game. And I think if they did that, it would definitely be a very acceptable game. And, you know, I've played just about every wrestling game there is. So, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second, because that's really what this video is about. It's about me talking about the fact that I would say over the last 10 years, wrestling games, in my opinion, have really not been where they should, particularly here in the United States. In Japan, that's a little different, but particularly here in the United States, for various reasons. Now, I say this as when I first got my NES way back in the day, the first game that actually, me and my brother, when we got our NES, we pulled all of our Christmas money together and we put it towards 3 games. Rush and Attack, so we already had Super Mario Brothers. Rush and Attack, which I always loved in the arcade. Gradius, which he always loved in the arcade. And we were both big wrestling fans at the time, so we got NES Pro Wrestling. And which is, you know, Starman Power is what it should be called. But fun game, and kind of that was my first kind of thought, my first game into, you know, pro wrestling games. And then of course I played various games over the years. I also played WrestleFest, Showdown, the WWE, you know, WrestleMania Arcade in your house. You know, leading up until we finally got WCW versus the World, which was such a big, you know, accomplishment. Though I had already played because of there was actually an import store here in the United States, or here in Houston, where I was able to play and get, because the guy knew I loved pro wrestling, so he told me, hey man, I just got this in, it's supposed to be really good, and it was Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium, Super Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium, which, in my opinion, to see how much that game had on it, as compared to games that came after it, it is very, with the exception of like WCW versus the World, or WCW NWO World Tour, and those types of games where you definitely had a big, huge roster. You know, that Fire Pro game just kind of blows everything out of the water, in my opinion. I'm biased because I'm a big Fire Pro fan, but really it is that good of a game, and really kind of stands the test of time, particularly since you could edit your characters and you could do a lot of things that you couldn't at that point do. You know, and first game I ever pre-ordered was actually Attitude, which you know, I do think it's a bad rap, because I do think the game was okay, and the Creator Wrestler was a lot of fun, because it was, I think, with the exception of what Fire Pro at that time was doing in Japan, I think it really was head and shoulders above everything else. You of course had the arcade games too, like Saturday Night Slammers and its sequel, which I can't remember off the top of my head. You had the SNK game, 3-Count Bout. There were a couple other games like that, which were like 2D scroller wrestling games, which were a lot of fun in their own kind of way. And then of course, you know, we got into the SmackDown games. You had the ECW game, which I bought more so to help support ECW, and which was just Attitude 3, to be honest, and was, you know, what it was. Wasn't a great game, but still had a pretty good. The one thing I will say about that engine is it did have a pretty good Creator Wrestler at the time, until I would say until probably Here Comes the Pain and Here Comes, for a US game, really kind of up the ante a little bit. And we kind of go from there. The best wrestling game I've ever played, and I've said this before, All Japan vs. Virtua, or the last of its series, Giant Graham 2000, which was based on the Virtua Fighter fighting engine, which at the time was considered the best fighting engine at that time, particularly for the fact that it was a true 3D fighting engine, unlike Tekken, which is not, a lot of people like to say it's a 3D fighting engine, but it's not really a 3D fighting engine, particularly at that point in time. But Virtua Fighter was definitely head and shoulders above, at that time, above everything else. They turned it into a wrestling game, and it was really good. Definitely had more of an arcade feel of it. You had to tap out your moves and all that sort of thing. But it had a Creator Wrestler too that was very good, and it had a variety of moves. Felt like you were still, even though you had this arcade feel to it, you were in a wrestling ring and you were doing a wrestling match. If you can actually look the game up on here on YouTube and see some of the matches, and the matches look very authentic and about as real as any other wrestling game. And that's a 9-year-old game. And that's one of my biggest problems. I mean, even if you look at the Fire Pro series never, you know, went full bore into 3D graphics until you got King Coliseum, which I've never played because I never modded my PlayStation 2. So I you know, I can't really get into that part of it. But as far as though I've heard those two games are, both games, particularly the second one, is very good, a lot of fun, and what probably pro wrestling games kind of should be at this point in time, which is kind of my point of this video, because it amazes me that the US video game companies do not and will not pay attention to the Japanese wrestling companies, unless they're just trying to port over those games and you know, put kind of a fresh paint on it and release it to the general public. I heard a lot of people talk about the Impact game and the fact that they wanted to kind of send a message to try to make SmackDown versus Raw better. I would say this, because I think it's money much better spent, is to buy the Fire Pro series if you have a PlayStation 2, or if you have a PlayStation 3, because you can play it on PlayStation 3 as well. And if you have a PlayStation 3, it's a very good deal, because you can download all of the packs and all of the creative, all of the pre-created wrestlers that people have spent years creating. So you don't have to worry about that, because it is very in-depth. The Fire Pro on the last one was very, very in-depth created wrestler. Probably too much and very awe-inspiring for a lot of people, I'm sure. But I would say buy that game, because there has been rumors that if that game did well and sold enough copies, they would bring over some version of King of Colosseum, which would be even a bigger deal, because it is 3D. It does have 3D graphics. It is what I think more people want to see. The match selection isn't all there, but it's it's definitely an extremely good game. Wrestling games, just I don't know. I don't get why U.S. companies just can't look at what the Japanese have done right and said, let's bring that in and do that. And it's been a problem, like I've said, for probably 10 years. I mean, it's been almost 9 years now since Sega came out with Giant Graham, and no one's been able to improve upon that. No one's been able to say, hey, this looks like the best game. I mean, you're talking about guys who make these games are usually gamers, so they know what is a good game, even if other people don't or have never played it, or if it's kind of an underground game, and should know enough to rip it off. I always hear this comment of, well, why doesn't X&X company buy X&X game system or fighting system or whatever this, and I'm always like, what the hell are you talking about? How many games have ripped off Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat? And when I say rip off Street Fighter, I'm not talking about SNK. I'm talking, you can include lots of other people other than SNK, because we can get into the whole SNK Capcom debate BS. But that said, all they did is people just ripped it off. You can do that today. You can go, oh, you know what? That system worked. Let's use that, to make a video game. There's a creative system that works. Let's steal that. Let's do that. Let's do this, that, and the other. And you look at a lot of games that, I've heard a lot of people talk about the Impact game and talk about, it's the first game. I've seen a lot of first wrestling games that were far better than this game, in my opinion. Giant Graham being one of them, even though it was based on the Virtual Fighter, gameplay. It was basically, they basically had to totally revamp the system, because there aren't rope throws or any of that stuff in Virtual Fighter, or at least at that time. So, you have all of those sort of things. So it's to me is very, it bothers me that pretty much the best, probably in my opinion, the game that if it was a wrestling game and it had pro wrestlers in it, the game that everyone would be bowing down to and saying that's the greatest game ever, wouldn't be Here Comes the Pain. It would be Def Jam 2, because that game was so wonderfully great, because EA took a gameplay system that was very good and then tweaked it, and tweaked the system, made it better, added what they thought needed to be added, and made a really good game out of it. Just they didn't have a wrestling promotion to put on it, so they stuck rappers in it, and it was still really good, and it was still a lot of fun. So there's kind of my rant on the video game industry, particularly when it comes to pro wrestling games, because I really do feel like, it's like, what the hell? I know people are going to say, oh, you sound like, one of these video game people that, everything in Japan is better. I got news for you. Not everything in Japan is better. I would definitely say that the U.S. has passed Japan now in role-playing games, because Japanese role-playing games are not nearly as good as they once were. They're not nearly as deep. They're definitely, they were always story-driven, but just kind of going on a rant, but they're definitely, I wouldn't even say they're story-driven as much as they are, animated scene-driven now, to such a degree that it's not even like playing a game. And I think games like Oblivion, the Baldur's Gate series, Neverwinter Nights, a lot of D&D type games, and a lot of other games have, in my opinion, surpassed the Japanese role-playing games in various fashions as far as a role-playing game goes. And I think the Japanese have kind of gotten away from what made Japanese role-playing games good at one point. You still have a few that kind of get it, but anyways, that's a different rant for a different time. But so I definitely don't believe that, you know, if it's in the US, Japan, it's definitely better, because that's not always the truth, because you always have some games that in Japan that, you know, are culture games that just aren't going to be as good here, because we're going to be like, what is this craziness? Though that said, you know, it's just, you would think that US game designers would, you know, backwards compatibility, or you know, backwards log or dissect some of these games and try to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to make a good wrestling game? And if we can make a good wrestling game, how do we do it? Because they don't seem to truly understand that aspect of it. And when you're making a wrestling game, I mean, when I was at the game store today, you know, they were kind of shocked at how many people wanted to buy Impact. When Fire Pro first came out, there was a shortage because they didn't expect that many, and part of that was because you didn't have a lot of places allowing you to pre-order it, because it was, you know, it was a $20 game and it was for the PlayStation 2 and no one really knew about it, so you had all that nonsense going on. But it was crazy, and I think that the thing is that you have die-hard wrestling fans that would definitely go out and buy, you know, these games. And you know, if you look at Impact's ratings, if they get a, you know, or if you look at die-hard internet fans to start with, you know, that's 250,000 people maybe to buy a video game, which is pretty good. I mean, a million copies for a video game is considered a big, huge success. So, for, you know, for most games, so I mean, that's a big deal. And you know, I think that I think that U.S. video game companies, when they make wrestling games, need to understand that okay, you're dealing with a hardcore audience, which means you need to make a hardcore game, and if you don't do that, you're probably going to fail. And I think that that's been the problem with wrestling games, I would say, over the last, like I said, probably 10 years, is they're just not being, they're being designed, I think, more for, well, these are just wrestling fans, they're not video game fans, so we don't have to make a die-hard game, you know. And, you know, you look at SmackDown vs. Raw, and it has Madnitis, you know, in the fact that it's just the same game over and over again. And that's one thing I would say about Impact, is that one of the good things that I have read about Impact, and it looks like, is that they're going to have so much downloadable content, which to me would be something that SmackDown vs. Raw would look at and say, you know what, maybe this would be a good thing. Instead of coming out with a game every year, maybe a game every other year, maybe a game every 3 years, and just allowing downloadable content, because the graphics don't improve that much. And really, they never tweak the gameplay that much, so you could actually just keep, you know, downloading new characters, downloading new arenas, maybe, you know, that sort of thing, and downloading new stuff for the creator wrestler, that sort of thing, instead of just releasing a new game every year. I don't think we're going to see that, because people are still going to buy a game every year and they can make more money that way. But so I would say that is one good thing Midway is doing with TNA Impact, because the downloadable content looks like it's going to be very good for the game, even if the game itself is just kind of so-so. I wouldn't say the game's bad, I would just say it's just kind of there, and either you're going to like it or you're going to hate it, probably. But I would say very few people are actually just going to fall in love with the game, unless you're playing against somebody, because that's another thing, is the AI is really stupid. But anyways, I just want to come on and kind of rant about that for a little while. I've gone on for a very long time, so I'm out. Later. Have a good one.